I still can't believe what happened that night. Even writing it down feels surreal. My friend, Jake, and I had been looking for something fun to do. We were both 23, reckless, full of energy, and craving an adventure. We had heard rumors about this old, dilapidated building that sat on the edge of town. People said it had been abandoned for years, but that didn't stop people from talking about it. There were stories about it being haunted, and some even claimed it was cursed. But, honestly, we didn't believe in any of that. We were bored and decided to check it out. We had nothing to lose, right? The building was a massive, decaying structure, brick walls crumbling away, windows boarded up, and the air surrounding it thick with dust. As we stood outside it, the sun was setting, casting a dim, eerie glow across the yard, which was overgrown with wild grass. The building seemed to loom over us, like it was watching us, but I shrugged it off. We were there for fun. I remember walking through the front gate, the metal creaking loudly, as if the building itself was groaning, welcoming us in. The inside was dark, smelled like mold and old wood, and the floorboards creaked under our feet as we ventured deeper. We tried to make jokes, but the tension was starting to build. Something didn't feel right. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it felt like we were being watched. Jake laughed it off, of course. He's the kind of guy who'd call you a chicken for even thinking about leaving early. We explored for a while, trying to find anything worth seeing. The building was enormous, endless hallways and rooms filled with broken furniture, shattered glass, and graffiti on the walls. I was starting to get a little freaked out, not by ghosts or anything, but more by the overwhelming silence of it all. It felt too still, like it had been untouched for decades. Every step we took, the house seemed to sigh in protest, as if it was begging us to leave. We found a staircase that led up to the second floor. The stairs were rickety, the kind that threatened to collapse with every step. I remember looking up, seeing a faint light through the cracks in the ceiling, and for some reason, it didn't make sense. Why was there light in an abandoned building? Maybe it was just the moon, but it felt wrong. Still, we continued up. That's when we heard the first noise. It was a low, croaky sound, like something was breathing. I turned to Jake. His face had gone pale. I couldn't see his eyes in the darkness, but I could feel his tension, his pulse racing. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice shaky. I was about to brush it off, but then we heard it again, a deep, throaty croak, followed by the sound of something scraping across the floor, like nails on stone. I thought it was a rat or some wild animal, but when the scraping stopped, there was an unsettling silence. It was thick, almost suffocating. I looked at Jake, and his face was ashen, his eyes wide, a look I'd never seen on him before. I wasn't sure if I was just scared of the unknown or if he was genuinely terrified, but I felt it too. Then came the next sound. A slow, dragging thump. Like footsteps, heavy, deliberate. My heart skipped a beat. I know Jake heard it too because he grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin, making me flinch. We stood there, frozen, barely breathing, as we listened to the steps getting closer. I could feel my throat tightening, my pulse pounding in my ears. I knew we needed to move. But neither of us could find the courage to turn around. We were stuck in that moment, unable to process what was happening. It was too dark to see much, but that sound, it was so clear. Something was moving in the building with us. Something, not normal. The heavy steps came closer, and I felt every muscle in my body freeze. The fear was so thick in the air it was suffocating. I couldn't hear my own breathing anymore, just that damn scraping sound, the nails dragging across the floor, then the slow thumps of the thing moving. It felt like it was getting closer by the second, and I couldn't tell if it was moving toward us or just circling. Either way, it wasn't good. Jake's grip on my arm tightened, and I could feel his hand trembling. I wanted to tell him to move, to run, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't let me. We stood there, listening to the sounds getting louder and closer until it felt like it was right next to us. And then, it stopped. For a moment, there was absolute silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring and your skin crawl. I don't know why, but I had this sickening feeling that the thing, whatever it was watching us. It was aware we were there. My heart was racing in my chest, each beat so loud in my ears I thought it might give us away. I finally couldn't take it anymore. I turned to Jake, ready to whisper something, but he was already looking at me, his face ghostly pale. "We need to go, now," he whispered, his voice barely audible. He didn't need to say it twice. I nodded, trying to keep my breathing steady, but the tension was unbearable. We started moving slowly, cautiously, careful not to make a sound. But then I heard it. A low, deep growl, almost like an animal in pain, but so much more guttural. It wasn't coming from the floor above or below us, it was coming from the hallway just ahead. It echoed through the narrow corridor like something was stalking us. That's when I saw it. A shadow. A shape that seemed to distort the very air around it. I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't human, it wasn't animal, it was something in between, something unnatural. I caught just a glimpse of it at the far end of the hallway. The light from the broken window reflected off the dust particles in the air, casting a dim, sickly glow, and I saw the outline of something massive, too tall for a man, but hunched over, its head nearly scraping the ceiling. It had broad shoulders, huge arms, and twisted legs. Its body moved with an unnatural, jerky motion. Its skin looked like leather, stretched too tight across its bones. And its eyes. I'll never forget the eyes. They were glowing faintly in the dark, an eerie yellow that seemed to pierce right through me, like it knew exactly where I was. I didn't even get a chance to process what I was seeing before Jake yanked me hard, pulling me toward the stairs. His voice was shaky, nearly panicked. "We need to get out of here now." But it was already too late. The thing was moving toward us faster than I could comprehend. Its massive form thudded against the floor, the sound like an earthquake. The growls grew louder, more violent, and the scraping noise, it wasn't just nails now. It was claws. The floorboards were creaking under the weight of whatever the hell that thing was. I could feel the building trembling beneath us. We ran. No thought, just instinct. We bolted for the stairs, but before we could make it, I heard it, the thing was right behind us. The sound of its footsteps, heavy and relentless, pounding against the old wooden floors. It was gaining on us, and I could feel my heart in my throat, choking me. I glanced over my shoulder just for a split second. I shouldn't have. There it was, close enough that I could see the twisted, broken horns jutting from its skull. Its mouth was gaping wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth, too many to count. The croaking sound came from deep within its throat, like a toad choking on its own breath. It made my skin crawl. The thing opened its mouth wider, and I swear, I could hear it laughing, not in a normal sense, but a low, throaty cackle, like it was toying with us. Jake screamed, pulling me harder up the stairs. I could feel my legs burning, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but we couldn't stop. Not now. We made it to the second floor, but that didn't stop the creature. I could hear its footsteps, scraping the walls as it tried to fit through the doorway, the sound of it shifting through the dark like it was morphing itself to follow us. I stumbled into a room, a small, decaying office space, my legs buckling beneath me as I collapsed against the wall. Jake was already in the far corner, crouching down, his breath frantic, his body trembling. I could see his eyes wide with terror, staring at the door. He was shaking so badly I thought he might collapse right there. We had no idea where the thing was now. We could hear it, just barely, moving through the building, each step sending a tremor through the floor. It was out there, somewhere. And it knew we were here. Every sound in the building, every tiny scrape or groan from the old structure, felt like a death sentence. We didn't dare move. We didn't even breathe. The air in that room was thick, so heavy with dread that every breath felt like it was dragging me deeper into a pit of terror. We sat there in complete silence, barely daring to move, our bodies pressed against the cold, decaying walls. The floorboards groaned under every small shift, and I could hear Jake's breathing, shallow and ragged, but I couldn't bring myself to make a sound. And then, it came again, the growl. It wasn't distant anymore. It was so close that I could feel the vibration in the walls. The thing was in the hallway outside, just beyond the door, and it wasn't moving like before. This time, it was slow, methodical, as though it was savoring the moment. It wanted us to know it was there. I could almost feel its eyes on me, even though I didn't dare look. I was convinced it could sense my fear, that it was feeding off it. Jake's eyes were locked on the door, his body trembling as he slowly reached out and grabbed my wrist, squeezing it so hard that it hurt. "Don't move," he whispered, barely audible. "It's right there." I nodded, but it was like I couldn't breathe. The silence stretched on, but it felt wrong, too wrong. The creature was out there, stalking us, and we were trapped in this tiny room, with nowhere to go. We had no plan. We had no way out. Suddenly, the door creaked. Just a tiny sound, barely perceptible, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. The thing was close. Too close. I felt my pulse spike as I pressed my back harder into the wall, trying to make myself as small as possible. I wanted to vanish, to disappear into the building itself, but it wasn't that easy. Then, the door rattled, a sharp, jarring sound that made both of us jump. The creature was trying to get in. I could hear its claws scraping the wood, slower, more deliberate, like it was toying with us. It knew we were in here, and it wanted us to feel the terror building. The growl from behind the door was louder now, closer. I could feel it in my chest. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure the thing would hear it and tear the door down. I shot a panicked glance at Jake, and I saw the terror in his eyes mirrored in my own. He was pale, sweat dripping from his face, but his grip on my wrist was vice-like, pulling me toward the corner of the room. We couldn't stay in the open. We had to hide. We crawled toward a pile of broken furniture in the far corner, huddling behind an old wooden desk that had collapsed on one side. It barely hit us, but we had no other choice. The room was too small for us to escape, too close for us to run without being seen. We crouched there, barely breathing, waiting for the inevitable. The door creaked again. It was opening, just a crack, and that's when I heard it, its claws scraping against the wood, then the sound of its heavy breathing, wet and deep. The thing was right outside the door, just inches away from us. My chest tightened with fear as I felt every inch of my body scream to run, but I couldn't. We had no place to go. I could see Jake's face, his eyes wide, his mouth barely open in shock. He was breathing so quietly it was almost painful. Then, I heard it. The thing stepped into the room. I couldn't see it at first, not fully. But I could hear it. I could feel it in the air. It was breathing, heavy and slow, like it was trying to pick up our scent. The croaking noise, that toad-like sound, filled the room, making my skin crawl. I didn't dare look, didn't dare move a muscle. I just squeezed my eyes shut, hoping that if I couldn't see it, maybe it wouldn't see me. The creature was sniffing around, its head moving slowly from side to side. I could hear its feet dragging across the floor, heavy like it was dragging something behind it. Every scrape, every sound, sent a shiver down my spine. It was just standing there, breathing, waiting. It knew we were here. The seconds felt like hours. My body was rigid, paralyzed with fear. I could barely hear Jake's breathing now, it was as if the whole world had gone silent except for that thing in the room with us. It was too close. I could feel its presence looming over us, even without looking. And then, in a move I didn't see coming, it moved. Fast. It was as if all that slow, deliberate pacing had been to build tension, and now it was time to strike. The creature lunged forward, its massive body smashing against the desk, sending it toppling over. Jake screamed, his voice a raw sound of pure terror. I scrambled to get out of the way, but the creature's claws scraped the floor, sharp and fast, and I felt the air move as it swung toward us. Jake pushed me out of the way, and that was when I saw it. For the briefest second, just a flash of it, its grotesque face, the twisted horns, its mouth open wide, filled with rows of jagged teeth. Its eyes, those yellow eyes, stared at me, burning into my soul. I saw the blood dripping from its claws. And then we ran. Jake and I bolted. There was no plan, no thought, just pure, primal instinct. I couldn't see the thing anymore, but I could hear it, feel it, every step, every scrape of its claws dragging against the floor. It was faster than us, but we had one advantage: we knew the building. We knew the layout. At least, we thought we did. We sprinted down the hallway, my lungs burning with every step, the sharp scent of old dust and decay stinging my nose. We passed by rooms that seemed to blur together in my panicked state, faded wallpaper peeling off the walls, broken glass crunching underfoot, a hallway that seemed to stretch forever. The building was a maze, and I was sure that if we didn't find a way out soon, it would swallow us whole. I could hear it now, the thing, its steps heavy and dragging, like it was gaining on us but not in a rush. It was toying with us. I knew it. It wasn't rushing to catch us, it was enjoying the chase. The sound of its croaking breath echoed through the halls, and every now and then, I would hear the scrape of its claws against the floor, making my heart skip a beat. "Keep moving," Jake gasped. His voice was ragged, filled with desperation. I didn't need to be told twice. I kept running, trying to ignore the pounding in my chest, the dizziness in my head. But no matter how fast I ran, it felt like the thing was always just behind me, always just a breath away from tearing me apart. We reached a stairwell, the stairs creaking and groaning under our weight. I didn't know if it was the right way, but we had no other choice. We had to keep moving. As we raced up the stairs, I heard it again, louder this time, its growl shaking the walls. The thing was close. Too close. We had to get out of here. Jake reached the top of the stairs first, and I followed, my legs burning with exhaustion. But when I reached the landing, I froze. There was nowhere to go. The hallway was narrow, lined with empty rooms, and the windows were boarded up, casting everything in a gloomy, oppressive darkness. We were cornered. "No, no, no, no," Jake muttered, his voice full of panic. I looked at him, and I could see it, he was breaking. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror, and for a moment, I thought he might just lose it completely. "Jake," I whispered, my voice low but urgent. "We have to think. We can't just run." He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and ran down the hallway, his steps frantic, as if he thought he could outrun it. "Jake!" I shouted, but he didn't stop. His face was a mask of pure fear, and I had no choice but to follow him. But as I did, I heard it, the thing was right behind us. I could feel the vibration in the floor as it moved, heavy and relentless. And then, there it was, a door. A door at the end of the hallway. It was cracked open, barely hanging on its hinges, but it was something, a chance, maybe. Without thinking, I grabbed Jake's arm and yanked him toward it. We stumbled through the door, into what looked like an old storage room. The air was thick with dust, and the room was filled with old, rusted equipment. Shelves lined the walls, stacked high with crates, broken furniture, and abandoned tools. It was our only chance. We bolted toward the far corner of the room, squeezing between shelves and crates, trying to put as much distance as we could between us and the thing. I could hear it still, its growls echoing down the hallway, getting louder, closer. The sound of its steps shook the floor, the walls. I could feel the building itself tremble under the weight of whatever it was. Jake was hyperventilating now, his breathing coming in short, panicked gasps. I knew he was close to breaking, and I didn't know if I could hold it together for both of us. "Jake, we need to hide. We can't just run forever," I whispered urgently. He didn't answer. His eyes were wide, his gaze flicking nervously toward the door. And that's when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of claws scraping against metal. The thing was in the room. It wasn't far. I could hear it snuffling, the low, croaking sound of its breath getting louder, coming closer. I wanted to scream, but my throat was dry. My body was frozen, paralyzed with terror. I looked around desperately, searching for something, anything, that could help us. My eyes landed on an old, rusted filing cabinet near the back of the room. It was large, heavy, and there was a narrow space behind it, just wide enough for us to hide. "Come on," I whispered urgently, grabbing Jake's arm. He didn't resist, just stumbled after me as we crawled behind the filing cabinet, pressing ourselves against the cold metal. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my ears as I listened to the thing moving closer. It was just outside the door now. I could hear its breath, wet and heavy, and the sound of its claws scraping across the floor. It was right there. And then, silence. For a moment, I thought we had escaped. Maybe it had lost us. Maybe it was gone. But then, I heard something. A low, deep growl. It was right next to us. The silence was deafening, the air so still that I could hear my own pulse thrumming in my ears. I dared not breathe, not even a whisper, as the creature's growl reverberated in the air around us. It was close. Too close. I could feel the vibrations from its heavy steps in the ground beneath me, like the whole room was trembling with its presence. Jake's hand was clamped over his mouth, stifling the scream that was fighting to break free. He was shaking uncontrollably, his eyes wide with terror as he stared at the space between the filing cabinet and the wall. The air around us felt like it was closing in, suffocating us. The thing moved closer, its heavy claws dragging against the floor, scratching and scraping. I could hear the air thickening with its breath, the croaking sound growing louder and more distorted with every passing second. It was sniffing, low and drawn out, as if it was searching for us. I wanted to say something, to reassure Jake, but my voice wouldn't come. My throat was dry, my body frozen in place as I held my breath. Then, with a sickening crunch, the door creaked open. I could barely make out the silhouette of the creature in the doorway, its twisted, hulking frame standing in the threshold. Its eyes, those glowing yellow eyes, searched the room, slowly, deliberately, as though it was savoring the moment, knowing it had us cornered. My heart pounded in my chest, louder than ever. I wanted to run, to scream, but all I could do was stare in terror, paralyzed by fear. The creature was sniffing the air again, its head jerking from side to side like it was picking up on our scent. The growling noise deepened, vibrating through the room like a low hum. It was hunting. I could see its twisted form in the dim light, a grotesque mixture of human and something more monstrous. Its long, clawed hands scraped the doorframe as it stepped inside, and I could hear the wet, deep breath escaping from its throat as it moved further into the room. Its head turned toward us, and for a moment, our eyes locked. The thing knew we were there. A wave of pure terror washed over me, my body nearly seizing up from the intensity of the moment. Jake's body shook violently beside me, and I could see the pure panic in his eyes. His breath was coming in sharp, rapid bursts, and I could see his lips trembling. He couldn't take it anymore. I could see the panic taking over, his thoughts scattering like leaves in the wind. Without warning, he lunged forward. I didn't know what he was thinking. Maybe he thought he could outrun it, or maybe he just couldn't stand being trapped anymore. Whatever it was a mistake. Jake's sudden movement caught the creature's attention immediately. Its head snapped toward him with terrifying speed, and its glowing eyes locked onto him like a predator zeroing in on its prey. "Jake, no!" I screamed, but it was too late. The creature was on him in an instant. I heard the sickening thud of its massive claws raking across Jake's body, the sharp screech of metal as the creature's hand tore into his flesh. Jake screamed, this horrible, gut-wrenching scream that sent a shiver down my spine, but before I could react, the thing had lifted him off the ground, holding him up by the arm with one of its claws like he was a ragdoll. My mind went blank. All I could think was that I had to move, had to help him, but my body wouldn't respond. I could hear Jake's cries growing more desperate, more ragged, and every second felt like a century. And then, the thing threw him. It wasn't like a throw, more like a careless toss, like Jake's body was nothing more than an object. He slammed into the far wall with a sickening crack, his body crumpling to the floor in an unnatural position. I couldn't move. I couldn't process it. I thought I was going to pass out. I couldn't even bring myself to look at Jake. I couldn't. The sight of him, the sound of him, it was too much. But the creature wasn't done. It wasn't done with us. Not yet. I could hear its claws scraping the floor again, its footsteps slow, deliberate, closing the distance between us. I was shaking, every nerve screaming at me to get out, to run, but I knew it was pointless. There was nowhere left to run. And then it spoke. Its voice wasn't a voice at all. It was a low, guttural growl, but somehow it was clear, like the sound was meant for me alone. It spoke in a language I couldn't understand, a language so old and twisted that hearing it made my skin crawl. The creature's mouth opened wide, revealing rows of jagged, yellowed teeth, and it tilted its head as though it was savoring my fear. I could feel its presence filling the room, surrounding me, closing in on me. I had no idea what it wanted, what it was planning, but I knew that if I didn't do something, I would be next, that I could hear my heart in my ears. The creature was right there, right in front of me, its heavy breath hot and fetid against the air. I didn't dare move, barely dared to breathe. Every instinct in me screamed to run, to do something, anything, but my body was paralyzed by fear. The thing's crooked head tilted slightly, its glowing yellow eyes never leaving mine. There was a strange, sickening curiosity in those eyes, like it was studying me, trying to understand what I was thinking. I could feel its presence, cold and oppressive, closing in on me. It didn't need to speak, didn't need to make a sound. I could sense it, the hunger, the pure, unrelenting desire to tear me apart. I glanced to my left, my mind racing. Jake was still on the floor, crumpled and motionless. He wasn't moving. I didn't know if he was alive or not, and the thought of it nearly shattered me. I had to act. I couldn't die here. I couldn't let this thing take me. I took a slow, cautious breath, trying to still my racing heart. My eyes scanned the room desperately, looking for anything I could use. That's when I saw it, the old rusted pipe running along the far wall, near the back of the room. It was long, thick, and looked like it might have some weight to it. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. The creature took a step forward. I froze, but I couldn't just stand there anymore. I had to move. I had to fight back, or I was dead. I turned and made a run for it. The moment I shifted, I heard it, its growl, low and menacing, rumbling from deep within its chest. It had seen me move. Its claws scraped across the floor, and I felt its eyes burn into my back, its presence closing in like a shadow. I reached the pipe, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I grabbed hold of it. It was heavier than I thought, and for a moment, I almost dropped it. But then I gripped it tighter, the metal digging into my palms, and I turned around just as the creature's claws slashed through the air. I barely dodged in time, the sharp edge of its claw grazing my arm. I swung the pipe. It connected with a sickening thud. The creature let out an inhuman screech, more of a guttural croak than a true cry, and it staggered back. It wasn't a heavy blow, not enough to stop it, but it was enough to make it falter for a second. That moment was all I needed. I bolted. I ran past it, my legs burning with exhaustion, the creature's growl still ringing in my ears. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I couldn't afford to. I pushed forward, running down the hallway, my heart pounding so loudly I thought I would collapse. I rounded a corner and, thank God, there it was. A window. It wasn't big, and the glass was cracked, but it was an opening. It was something. I didn't even hesitate. I reached up, grabbed the windowsill, and tried to force the window open. My hands were slick with sweat, my fingers fumbling against the rusted frame, but finally, the window gave way. I heard it then, the creature's roar, loud and vicious. It was behind me, charging down the hallway, its claws tearing into the floor, the croaking growl filling the air like thunder. It was coming. I scrambled through the window, half falling as I tumbled onto the ledge outside. My breath caught in my throat as I looked down, there was a drop, a long drop to the ground below. But it was my only choice. The creature was close. Too close. I jumped. The world spun as I fell, the wind rushing past my face. The ground came up fast, and I hit it hard, my legs giving out beneath me as I landed in a roll, the pain shooting up my spine. But I didn't stop. I forced myself to my feet, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I looked back at the window, half expecting the creature to follow, but it didn't. The only sound now was my ragged breathing in the distant, haunting croak of the thing still trapped inside. I ran. I ran until my legs couldn't carry me anymore, my chest burning with every breath. I didn't stop to look back, didn't stop to think. I just ran. Eventually, I made it to the street. The lights of the city felt like a beacon, something so normal and safe compared to what I had just been through. I stopped at the edge of the road, panting, my body shaking from the adrenaline and the sheer terror of what had just happened. But even now, as I stood there, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That something was still out there. Watching that, I stood there on the street, the city lights flickering in the distance, feeling the cold night air cut through my clothes. My heart was still racing, my pulse pounding in my ears. I couldn't stop shaking. The adrenaline was still coursing through my veins, making my hands tremble as I clutched at my sides. I should have felt safe, but I didn't. The thing, the creature, was still out there, somewhere. I couldn't get its face out of my mind, the twisted, monstrous figure with glowing eyes and that awful, croaking breath. I could still hear it in my head, that sickening sound like a toad's croak, deep and wet, reverberating through my thoughts. I glanced around, making sure I was alone, but the streets were empty. It was just me, standing there in the cold, my mind reeling from what had happened. I should have been relieved to be out of that hellhole, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. I kept walking, every step heavy with fear, my eyes darting back and forth. I didn't know where I was going, I just needed to get away, to put as much distance between myself and that place as possible. And then, I heard it. A sound in the distance. It was faint at first, just a whisper on the wind. But as I walked, it grew louder. A croak. Low and wet. Deep. I stopped dead in my tracks. No. No, no, no. It couldn't be. I turned slowly, scanning the street behind me, but there was nothing. The road was empty, quiet, and still. The buildings loomed around me like silent witnesses, their windows dark and lifeless. But the sound, there it was again. A low, distorted croak, like something far off in the distance. I swallowed hard, my breath catching in my throat. I turned away from the sound and kept walking, faster now, my heart thudding louder with each step. But no matter how quickly I moved, I couldn't shake that feeling. That feeling that something was watching me. I reached the corner of the block, my legs moving on their own, faster and faster, and then I heard it once more. It wasn't distant anymore. It was close. I spun around, my breath ragged, my hands shaking uncontrollably. But again, there was nothing. The street was empty, lifeless. The darkness stretched on, oppressive and heavy, but no sign of the thing that had been chasing me. I turned the corner, practically running now, my heart racing faster than my legs could carry me. The sound of its croak was still there, like a distant memory, but it was so close now. So close I could feel it vibrating in the air, deep in my chest. And then I saw it. In the shadows. In the alley. Those eyes. Glowing yellow eyes. I froze. It was standing there, just beyond the edge of the street lamp's glow, its hulking figure almost lost in the darkness. It wasn't as close as it had been before, but it was watching me. Waiting. It croaked again, low and guttural, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. For a moment, I stood there, staring into the dark, watching those eyes gleam like twin lanterns in the night. The thing didn't move, didn't make a sound. It was just there. Watching. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I couldn't move. And then it stepped forward, one slow, deliberate step after another, its claws scraping against the pavement with each movement. Its massive form seemed to swallow the darkness, moving closer with terrifying purpose. It was following me. It had never left. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I had escaped. I thought I had. But no. This thing, the creature, it wasn't just hunting me. It was attached to me. To my scent. To the fear that it had tasted when it had caught me before. It wasn't going to let me go. Not ever. It would chase me until the end of time if it had to. And it was waiting, watching, biding its time. I turned and ran again, faster this time, not caring about the world around me. All I could think was that I had to get away, had to make it home, had to lock myself in and never look back. But in my heart, I knew it was pointless. It wouldn't stop. It would never stop. As I ran, the sound of its croak echoed in the distance, closer and closer with every step. And I realized, with a sickening certainty, that no matter how far I ran, no matter where I went, it would always be there. Just behind me. Forever.